My husband bragged to his entire family about being an equal parent, so I gave him 6 weeks to prove it. It started at Easter dinner when Terrence announced to 23 relatives that he was tired of dads not getting credit. "I do everything 50-50, he said, gesturing with his wine glass. "Bedtime routines, homework, doctor appointments. I'm not a babysitter, I'm a parent." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. His mother beamed. His sisters nodded approvingly. His brother clapped him on the back like he'd won an Olympic medal for basic human decency. Nobody looked at me. The woman who'd been running on 4 hours of sleep for 7 years. See, Terrence had a particular talent. He'd change one diaper and announce it to the room. He'd make the kids frozen waffles and call it cooking breakfast. He'd drive them to soccer practice once, and suddenly he was father of the year. Meanwhile, I tracked vaccination schedules, knew every teacher's name, remembered which kid was allergic to which antibiotic, and hadn't slept past 6 a.m. since 2017. That night, I made a proposal. 6 weeks. You handle everything. School pickups, meal planning, laundry, bedtimes, homework. I'll still work my job, but the domestic load is yours. Terrence laughed. Easy. I already do half anyway. I didn't argue. I just started documenting. Week 1 was chaos disguised as confidence. He forgot Willa's lunch twice, brought Forrest to school in mismatched shoes. The pediatrician called asking why nobody showed up for Willa's checkup. Terrence claimed he never knew about it. I showed him the calendar notification I'd set up 3 weeks prior. By week 2, the cracks widened. Forrest had a meltdown because Dad didn't know he couldn't eat the red fruit snacks anymore. Willa's science project was due and Terrence hadn't bought supplies. He stayed up until 2 a.m., building a volcano that leaked everywhere. "This is harder than I thought," he admitted. "It's literally what I've done every day for 7 years," I replied. Week 3 brought the breaking point, parent-teacher conferences. Terrence arrived 15 minutes late to Willa's and couldn't remember her teacher's name. He called her Mrs. Patterson. Her name was Ms. Delaney. When she asked about Willa's reading struggles, Terrence looked blank. He didn't know she'd been working with a specialist since September. His mother called that night. I overheard him in the garage. "She's being unreasonable," he said. "She set me up to fail. Nobody can manage all this alone." I wanted to scream. Instead, I kept documenting. Week 4. Forrest got sent home sick. Terrence was in a meeting he couldn't leave, so he called me, panicked. I reminded him of our agreement. He left work early and spent the afternoon with our feverish son. When I got home, he looked exhausted. "How do you do this constantly?" he asked. "I never had a choice," I said. Week 5 was when everything imploded. Terrence forgot to pay the electricity bill. The power got shut off for 6 hours. The kids' tablets died. Willa cried because she couldn't do her homework. Forrest had a complete breakdown because his nightlight wouldn't turn on. Terrence sat on the kitchen floor in the dark, head in hands. "I'm sorry. I had no idea." For a moment, I almost felt sympathy. Then I remembered 7 years of being invisible. Week 6 arrived, and I thought maybe we'd turned a corner. Terrence was trying, really trying. He made grocery lists. He asked questions. He stopped calling his parenting heroic. Then his mother showed up unannounced. She surveyed the mess. Dishes in the sink, laundry on the couch, homework scattered across the table. "What has she done to you?" she demanded, glaring at me. Before I could respond, she said something that made my blood freeze. "Terrence told me everything about your little experiment, how you've been sabotaging him. We've already contacted a lawyer." I stared at Terrence. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Tell her the truth," I said quietly. He looked at his mother. "She's been impossible," he said. That's when I pulled out my phone and opened the folder I'd been building for 6 weeks. The folder contained 847 photos, 62 screenshots, and 14 video recordings. I had timestamps. I had evidence. I had receipts for every single claim Terrence had made at that Easter dinner and every single failure since. "What is that?" his mother asked, her voice sharp. I didn't answer her. Instead, I walked to the living room where everyone could see me clearly. My mother-in-law followed, Terrence trailing behind like a child who knew he was about to be caught in a lie. 6 weeks ago, I said calmly, your son stood in front of your entire family and claimed he did 50% of the parenting. I decided to let him prove it. His mother crossed her arms. And you sabotaged him. Did I? I opened the first photo. A screenshot of the shared family calendar showing Willa's pediatric checkup, the appointment I'd scheduled 3 weeks in advance. The notification that pinged Terrence's phone at 8 a.m. the morning of, which he dismissed without reading. This is the appointment he claims he never knew about. Terrence's face went pale. I swiped to the next image. A receipt from the grocery store dated the Sunday before the experiment started. I'd bought every supply Willa would need for her science project, and left them in the garage with a sticky note that read, Willa's Volcano Project, due March 14th. That box sat untouched for 11 days, I said. Terrence never looked at it. He waited until the night before, panicked, and drove to 3 different stores at 10 p.m. trying to find baking soda. His mother's expression flickered, just slightly. I have 6 weeks of this, I continued. Every missed pickup documented. Every emergency text he sent me begging for help. Every phone call where he asked me what the kids' allergies were because he'd never bothered to learn. Terrence finally spoke. You're making me look like a monster. No, I said. I'm showing everyone what I've been doing alone for 7 years while you took credit for it. I pulled up a video. Terrence, exhausted, sitting on our bedroom floor at 11 p.m. during week 3. His voice came through the speaker clearly. I don't know how she does this. I genuinely don't know. I thought I was helping, but I wasn't even close. I've never paid attention to any of it. His mother's face changed. She looked at her son like she was seeing him for the first time. That, I said, pausing the video, is the only honest thing he's said in 6 weeks. But instead of admitting it to you, he called you crying about how unfair I was being, and you came here threatening lawyers. The room was silent. His mother sat down heavily on the arm of our couch. Terrence, is this true? He didn't answer. Tell her about Ms. Delaney, I said. His mother looked confused. Who? Willa's teacher. The one Terrence called Mrs. Patterson at conferences because he'd never met her before. The one who asked about our daughter's reading struggles that he didn't know existed because he's never once looked at her progress reports. Terrence ran his hand through his hair. I made a mistake. You made a choice, I corrected. For 7 years, you chose to let me handle everything while you took credit for the occasional assist. You chose to make frozen waffles once a month and call yourself an equal partner. You chose to tell your family you were an amazing father while I kept our children alive on 4 hours of sleep. His mother stood up. I think I need to go. Before you do, I said, I want you to understand something. Your son isn't a bad father. He's a father who never had to be good because I filled in every gap. When Forrest had croup at 18 months and couldn't breathe, I was the one who drove to the emergency room at 2 a.m. while Terrence slept through his alarm. When Willa was bullied in first grade, I was the one who met with the principal 4 times. When the school called because Forrest had a fever, I was the one who left work every single time because Terrence couldn't be bothered to keep his phone on during meetings. I closed the folder on my phone. I'm not asking for a medal. I'm asking for acknowledgement that the work exists, that I exist. That for 7 years I've been invisible in this family while your son collected praise for showing up occasionally. His mother looked at Terrence. Why didn't you tell me the truth? Because it was easier not to, I answered for him. It's always been easier to let me be the villain. She left without saying goodbye to either of us. That night, after the kids were asleep, Terrence and I sat at the kitchen table in silence for a long time. I'm sorry, he finally said. For what specifically? He looked at me, really looked. For all of it. For not seeing you. For letting my mom think you were the problem. For telling everyone I was doing half when I wasn't even doing a quarter. Your mother called a lawyer. I know. You let her call a lawyer because you didn't want to admit to her that you lied. He nodded slowly. I didn't know how to tell her I'd been exaggerating. She's been so proud of me, telling all her friends what a great dad I am, while I did the actual work. Yes, I leaned back in my chair. What do you want, Terrence? Do you want a divorce? Do you want to keep pretending? What's the plan here? He was quiet for a moment. I want to do better. You've said that before. I know, but this time I actually understand what better means. He pulled out his phone and opened the Notes app. I made a list. Willa has an orthodontist consultation next Thursday. Forrest's allergy specialist appointment is in 2 weeks. Soccer registration opens on the 15th. The PTA meeting is the first Monday of every month. I stared at the screen. You wrote all that down? I also emailed Ms. Delaney and apologized for the conference. Asked her to send me weekly progress updates directly. He set the phone down. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking for the chance to actually earn the credit I've been stealing. 3 months later, I still had the folder on my phone, but I hadn't needed to open it. Terrence took Forrest to his allergy appointment alone. He sat in the waiting room with the other parents, filled out the forms himself, and actually listened when the doctor explained the new treatment protocol. He volunteered for the school field trip. Not the fun one to the zoo, but the boring one to the water treatment plant where parents had to wear hard hats and make sure nobody wandered off. He learned that Willa's favorite color wasn't pink anymore. It was teal. He knew this because he asked her. His mother came for dinner on a Sunday. She watched Terrence load the dishwasher, pack lunches for Monday, and quiz Forrest on his spelling words while I sat on the couch reading a book. Things look different around here, she said carefully. They are different, I replied. She sat down next to me. I owe you an apology. I turned to face her. Yes, you do. I believed what I wanted to believe. Terrence was always my easy child. Good grades. Never caused trouble. When he told me he was struggling, I assumed someone else must be responsible. Someone else was always responsible, I said. Me. She nodded slowly. I see that now. Do you? Because 3 months ago you came into my house and threatened me with lawyers because your son didn't want to admit he'd been lying to you his entire adult life. I know. She looked down at her hands. My husband was the same way. He'd change a light bulb and expect a standing ovation. I thought Terrence was different because he talked about being involved. I didn't realize talking about it wasn't the same as doing it. I set my book aside. I'm not interested in being your villain anymore. If you're going to be part of this family, you need to see me. Not as the difficult wife who makes unreasonable demands, but as the woman who held everything together while everyone else took credit. I understand. I'm not sure you do, but I'm willing to let you try. She stood up and walked to the kitchen where Terrence was explaining to Forrest why the word enough didn't follow normal spelling rules. I'm proud of you, she said to her son. Not for doing these things, for finally seeing that they needed to be done. The summer passed with small adjustments. Terrence started going to bed earlier so he could wake up with the kids instead of sleeping through the morning chaos. He created a shared digital grocery list that we both updated throughout the week. He researched summer camps and actually compared reviews and costs instead of forwarding me emails and asking me to take a look. Willa noticed. Daddy knows my teacher's name now, she said one afternoon while we were making cookies. He knew before I told him. That's because he's paying attention. He didn't used to pay attention. I measured out the flour. He did, just not to the same things. Like what? Like work stuff, sports stuff. I paused. Grown-up stuff that didn't involve you and Forrest as much. Willa considered this. But we're more important than work. Yes, I said. You are. She was quiet for a moment. Is that why you were sad sometimes? Because Daddy didn't know we were more important? My throat tightened. 7 years old, and she'd seen more than I realized. I wasn't sad. I was tired. Tired from doing everything by yourself? Sometimes. Yes. She nodded like this made perfect sense. I'm glad Daddy's helping now. You look less tired. I pulled her into a hug. I am less tired, sweetheart. That fall, Terrence's brother came to visit. Owen had been one of the loudest cheerleaders at that Easter dinner, clapping Terrence on the back and talking about how rare it was to find a man who actually stepped up. He arrived on a Friday evening. The house was reasonably clean. Dinner was in the oven. Terrence was helping Forrest with a book report while I reviewed emails on the couch. Owen looked around with raised eyebrows. Wow, you guys have really got the system down. We're figuring it out, Terrence said. I heard about the whole 6-week thing. Owen lowered his voice like he was sharing a secret. Pretty harsh, what she put you through. I looked up from my laptop. Terrence set down Forrest's book. Actually, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Owen blinked. What? I had no idea what I wasn't doing. I thought I was an equal partner. I genuinely believed that. Terrence glanced at me. Turns out, I was coasting on work that was invisible to me because I never had to do it. Owen shifted uncomfortably. Sure, but every marriage has a division of labor. That's true, I said, closing my laptop. The problem is when one person does the labor and the other person takes the credit. I'm not saying... You clapped for him at Easter dinner, I continued. You told him how lucky I was to have such an involved husband. You talked about how rare it is to find a man who shows up. Owen's face reddened. But you never asked me if it was true. You just believed him because it was easier to believe that your brother was exceptional than to consider he might be exaggerating. Terrence stood up. She's right, Owen. I lied. Not intentionally, exactly. I'd convinced myself the story was true. But when I had to actually prove it, I couldn't. Owen looked between us. This feels like an ambush. It's not, I said. It's honesty. Something this family has avoided for a long time. He stayed the weekend, but things were different. He watched Terrence do bedtime routines, pack school bags, handle a minor meltdown when Forrest couldn't find his favorite stuffed animal. By Sunday afternoon, Owen pulled me aside. I owe you an apology. For what specifically? He sighed. For assuming. My wife does most of the work at home. I've told myself it's because she's better at it, that she prefers to handle things her way. But maybe I just let her carry everything because it was convenient for me. Maybe you did. You really made Terrence do everything for 6 weeks? No helping at all? I still worked my job and lived in the house. But every domestic task, every child-related responsibility, was his. Owen shook his head. I couldn't do it. That's the point, I said. You couldn't, and neither could your brother. But I did it for 7 years and nobody thought twice about it. He left that evening with a lot to think about. A week later, his wife called to thank me. Apparently, Owen had come home and made a list of everything she handled alone. The list had taken him 3 days to complete. Thanksgiving was at our house that year. Terrence insisted on hosting, which meant actually hosting, not just setting up extra chairs while I did everything else. He planned the menu. He went grocery shopping. He prepped what could be prepped in advance and created a cooking schedule for the day itself. His sisters arrived early to help. They found Terrence in the kitchen, covered in flour, working on homemade pie crust. Who are you and what have you done with my brother? Colette asked, only half joking. I'm learning, he said. 6 months ago, I couldn't have told you how to make mashed potatoes from scratch. His younger sister, Renata, leaned against the counter. We heard about the experiment. Mom said it was brutal. I was setting the table in the next room, but I could hear everything. It wasn't brutal, Terrence said. It was a wake-up call. I'd been lying to everyone about who I was as a partner and as a father, including myself. That's very therapy speak of you. I'm actually in therapy now, learning about emotional labor and domestic equity. Silence. Then Colette laughed. Are you serious? Dead serious. My wife almost left me because I couldn't name my daughter's teacher. That seemed like something worth addressing. I set down the last plate and walked into the kitchen. He also learned where we keep the extra toilet paper. Took 8 years, but we got there. Terrence smiled. Upstairs closet, behind the towels. He's trainable, I said to his sisters. Who knew? The dinner itself was chaotic and loud and imperfect. Forrest spilled cranberry sauce on the tablecloth. Willa announced at the table that she'd decided to become a marine biologist and needed to know if we could get a pet octopus. The turkey was slightly dry, but for the first time in years, I sat through a family meal without keeping a mental checklist of everything that still needed to be done. Terrence refilled drinks. He cleared plates. He noticed when Forrest's cup was too close to the edge and moved it before disaster struck. After dinner, while the adults lingered over coffee, Terrence's mother found me in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher. Let me help, she said. I'm almost done. She started drying the serving dishes anyway. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about being invisible. I didn't respond. My generation was taught that managing a household was women's work. We didn't expect help because we didn't believe we deserved it. She set down a platter. I raised my sons the same way. I told them helping with chores made them good. I never told them that chores were their responsibility too. And now you're telling me this because? Because I'm sorry. Not just for the lawyer threat. For all of it. For raising a son who didn't know how to be a partner. For blaming you when he failed. For never once asking if you were okay. I turned off the water and faced her. I appreciate that. But an apology doesn't erase 7 years of being the family's invisible labor force. I know. Good. I dried my hands. Because I need you to understand something. I love your son, but I almost left him. Not because he was a bad person, but because he didn't see me. And when I finally demanded to be seen, he told you I was sabotaging him instead of admitting the truth. He was wrong. He was. And so were you. And so was everyone who believed him without question. I hung up the towel. I'm not looking for revenge or vindication. I'm looking for change. Real change. The kind that sticks. She nodded. I'd like to help with that, if you'll let me. How? By being better. By seeing the work. By not assuming that you have everything handled just because you've always handled everything. She paused. And by telling my other children what I've learned. Owen and his wife, Colette and her partner. They deserve to know what equal really looks like. I studied her face. She seemed sincere. For the first time in nearly a decade, she seemed like someone I might actually be able to talk to. Okay, I said. Let's see what happens. Christmas came and went. Terrence handled the gift shopping for the kids. Not the last-minute panic buying I'd done for years, but actual thoughtful purchases based on conversations he'd had with them about what they wanted. Willa got art supplies because she'd mentioned wanting to learn watercolor. Forrest got a build-your-own robot kit because he'd been obsessed with the robotics display at the Science Museum. On Christmas morning, Terrence handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a gift certificate for a weekend spa retreat. 3 days, alone. Owen's wife recommended the place, he said. I already arranged for the kids to stay with my mom. She's been asking for more time with them anyway. I stared at the certificate. You planned this yourself? Every detail. The booking, the travel arrangements, the childcare schedule. He smiled. I even made a packing list for the kids so you don't have to worry about them forgetting anything. I hadn't been alone for more than 6 hours in 7 years. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just go. Rest. Come back whenever you're ready. I went. For 3 days, I slept until 10 a.m. I read books without interruption. I ate meals that someone else prepared and cleaned up. I sat in a hot tub and stared at mountains and thought about absolutely nothing. When I came back, the house was standing. The kids were fed and bathed and happy. Terrence looked tired, but he looked proud. How was it? He asked. It was exactly what I needed. Good. He kissed my forehead. You deserved it. You've deserved it for years. The following spring, I got a call from a podcast producer. She'd heard about our story from a mutual friend and wanted to interview us about invisible labor in modern marriages. Both of us? I asked. If you're comfortable. We're doing a series on domestic equity and how couples navigate it. Your story seems like a good example of what can happen when one partner finally says enough. I talked to Terrence. He agreed. We recorded the episode on a Sunday afternoon while the kids were at my mother's house. The questions were thoughtful. The producer wanted to understand not just what happened, but why. What made you finally speak up? She asked me. Honestly, the Easter dinner, hearing him take credit in front of his entire family for work he wasn't doing, something snapped. And what made you agree to the challenge? She asked Terrence. He was quiet for a moment. Ego. I genuinely believed I was doing half. When she proposed 6 weeks of me handling everything, I thought I'd prove her wrong. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I proved myself wrong instead. What was the hardest part? Realizing how much I didn't know. My kids' allergies, their teachers' names, which nights had which activities. I'd been living in the same house as my children for 7 years and somehow avoided learning the basic details of their lives. The producer nodded. And what changed? Everything. My whole understanding of what it means to be a parent and a partner. I thought showing up occasionally made me exceptional. Turns out it just made me present. The episode aired 6 weeks later. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of women shared it with their husbands. Hundreds of couples reached out to say it had started conversations in their own homes. Several women wrote to say they'd proposed similar challenges and were finally being seen for the first time. One email stood out. A woman named Delphine from Ohio who had been invisible in her marriage for 15 years. My husband listened to your episode and cried, she wrote. He had no idea. He thought he was a good partner because he changed diapers sometimes and took the kids to the park on weekends. He didn't know what he wasn't doing because he'd never had to think about it. She included an update 3 months later. Her husband had taken over household management entirely for 1 month. He'd failed in similar ways to Terrence. He'd learned similar lessons. For the first time in our marriage, she wrote, he looks at me like I'm a person instead of a service provider. The podcast led to speaking invitations. Small events at first, then larger ones. Companies started asking me to present about invisible labor in the workplace. How the same dynamics that played out in marriages also showed up in offices, where women were expected to take notes, plan parties, clean common spaces, and manage emotional labor while their male colleagues focused on visible, promotable work. Terrence came to one of my talks. He sat in the back and listened. Afterward, he said, "You've built something important out of the worst thing I ever did to you. The worst thing you did was take me for granted." I corrected. "This is what I built from finally refusing to accept it. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of us." We celebrated our 10th anniversary that June. A small dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first date. No kids, no family, just us. 10 years, Terrence said. We almost didn't make it. We almost didn't. He reached across the table and took my hand. Thank you for fighting for us, for demanding better instead of just leaving. Thank you for actually becoming better. A lot of people would have blamed me and walked away. I almost did. Those first 2 weeks of the challenge, I seriously considered telling you I wanted a divorce. He shook his head. I was angry. I felt like you were punishing me for something I didn't understand. And now? Now I understand that you weren't punishing me. You were showing me reality. He squeezed my hand. The reality you'd been living in alone for 7 years. We ate. We talked. We remembered the early years when things were simpler, and we'd been too naive to realize how quickly patterns would set in. Do you think we'd have made it without the challenge? He asked. No, I was already planning my exit. I'd looked at apartments, started moving money into a separate account. His face fell. I didn't know that. That's the point. You didn't know any of it. Not how close I was to leaving, not how much I was carrying, not how invisible I felt every single day. I see you now. I know. That's why we're still here. After dinner, we walked along the river where Terrence had proposed 8 years earlier. The same spot where I'd said yes without hesitation, believing we were building something equal. If you could go back, he said, would you still marry me? I thought about it. Really thought. Yes, but I'd have that conversation earlier. I'd have demanded visibility from the start instead of waiting until I was broken. I wish you had. I didn't know I could. I didn't know it was allowed. He stopped walking and turned to face me. What do you mean? I mean, I grew up watching my mother do everything. She never complained. She never demanded help. She just handled it. And everyone praised her for being such a good wife and mother. I looked out at the water. I thought that's what love was supposed to look like. Quiet sacrifice without acknowledgement. And now I know that love is supposed to look like partnership. Real partnership. Not one person doing the work while the other person takes the credit. He pulled me into his arms. I'm sorry it took me so long to learn that. I'm sorry I waited so long to teach you. We stood there for a while, watching the water move. Everything we'd built and almost lost and rebuilt again. I read something the other day, Terrence said. A study about how much longer women live when their husbands die versus how much longer men live when their wives die. Let me guess. Women thrive and men fall apart. Pretty much. Because women lose their partners. Men lose their partners and their household managers and their social coordinators and their emotional support systems. He stepped back and looked at me. I would have fallen apart, probably. I don't want to be that person anymore. The person who only survives because someone else handles everything. Then don't be. I won't. He took my hand again as we started walking back toward the car. I promise. 2 years later, Terrence started a blog about his experience. He called it The Equal Parent Project and wrote honestly about what he'd learned, what he'd missed, and how he'd changed. The comments were mixed. Some men praised him for being brave enough to admit his failures. Others accused him of performing wokeness for attention. Women shared similar stories of invisible labor and partners who refused to see it. One post went viral. He'd written about the moment at parent-teacher conferences when he'd called Ms. Delaney the wrong name, how the teacher's face had shifted from confused to disappointed, how he'd realized, standing in that classroom surrounded by children's artwork, that he was a stranger in his own daughter's education. I thought I was a good father, he wrote. I'd never missed a school play. I showed up for birthday parties. I told everyone how involved I was. But involvement isn't the same as engagement. I was present without being attentive. I was there without being aware. My daughter had been working with a reading specialist for 6 months. 6 months. I didn't know because I'd never asked. I assumed my wife handled the school stuff because she always had. I never stopped to think about what handling it actually meant. It meant scheduling appointments, communicating with teachers, reviewing progress reports, helping with homework in specific, targeted ways, worrying about our daughter's struggles and researching solutions and implementing strategies. It meant doing the work I'd claimed credit for without ever actually doing. If you're reading this and feeling defensive, I get it. I was defensive too. It's easier to believe you're a good partner than to confront the possibility that you're not. But here's what I've learned. Being good isn't about the work you think you're doing. It's about the work you're actually doing. And if you have to think hard about the last time you scheduled a doctor's appointment or checked homework or knew what your kids ate for lunch, you might not be doing as much as you think. The post had thousands of shares. Other fathers wrote to say it had opened their eyes. Partners sent it to their husbands with notes that said, "This is what I've been trying to explain." One response came from a man named Victor who had been married for 20 years. "My wife left me last month," he wrote. "She said she'd been invisible for 2 decades and she couldn't do it anymore. I didn't understand what she meant until I read your post. I'm living alone now. I don't know how to run the dishwasher. I burned rice twice last week. My kids don't know my phone number because their mom always handled communication. I was exactly who you were, except I never got the wake-up call. I just got served with divorce papers." Terrence shared that email with me. "That could have been us," he said. "I know. You saved me from that. I saved us from that. We saved us." He nodded slowly. "I'm going to keep writing, keep talking about this. Maybe some guys will listen before it's too late. Maybe. It's worth trying." It was. Forrest turned 10 on a Saturday in March. Terrence planned the birthday party himself. The theme, the guest list, the activities, the cake. He even handmade invitations using skills he'd learned from Willa's watercolor lessons. At the party, surrounded by 10-year-olds hyped up on sugar, I watched my husband manage chaos with competence I'd never seen before. He knew which kids had allergies. He separated the ones who didn't get along. He led games with energy and patience. He cut cake into perfectly equal slices and made sure everyone had the right juice box. Forrest ran up to me, flushed with happiness. "Dad did such a good job, didn't he?" "He really did. He knows everything now, like you do." I pulled him into a hug. "He worked really hard to learn." "Because you taught him?" "Because he wanted to be better. And he did the work." Forrest nodded like this made perfect sense. "That's what you always tell us, that the people who matter do the work." "That's right. Dad matters a lot, doesn't he?" I looked across the yard at Terrence, who was now organizing a water balloon toss with the precision of a military operation. "Yeah, sweetheart, he really does. The story doesn't have a perfect ending. Real life doesn't work that way. Some days Terrence still forgets things. Last month, he missed the deadline for summer camp registration. 2 weeks ago, he scheduled a work call during Willa's dance recital and had to scramble to rearrange. The difference is how he handles it now. No excuses, no blaming me, just acknowledgement and adjustment. "I dropped the ball on camp," he said when he realized. "I'm calling them now to see if there's a wait list." There was. Forrest got in. Crisis averted. His mother still visits, but the dynamic has changed. She sees me now. Actually sees me. Last Thanksgiving, she told the whole table that I was the strongest person she knew. Not because she handles everything, she said, looking directly at me, but because she refused to accept being invisible. She demanded to be seen, and she changed this entire family in the process. I cried, just a little. Owen's marriage is better too. His wife emails me sometimes with updates. He does laundry now. He knows his kids' shoe sizes. He scheduled a dentist appointment without being asked. Small things. But small things add up to everything. The podcast producer called again last year. She wanted a follow-up episode. People want to know if the changes stuck, she said. They want to believe it's possible. We recorded another interview, 4 years after the original challenge. Terrence was even more honest this time. I backslide sometimes, he admitted. Old patterns are hard to break, but my wife calls me out and I correct. That's the difference now. There's accountability. What advice would you give other men listening? The producer asked. Terrence thought for a moment. Stop thinking you're exceptional for doing things your partner does every day without acknowledgement. If you changed a diaper, congratulations. You did the bare minimum. If you made dinner once, great. Now do it 3 times a week for the next decade. Equal parenting isn't about the things you do occasionally. It's about the things you do consistently, reliably, without being asked. The episode aired on Mother's Day. I don't celebrate Mother's Day the way I used to. No more brunch reservations made by me, gifts purchased by me, gratitude performances for things I'd already done alone. Now, Terrence and the kids plan everything. Last year, it was breakfast in bed that actually happened in bed instead of the kitchen because they forgot how to carry a tray. This year, they made me a scrapbook of memories they'd collected without my knowledge. Willa's page had a picture she'd drawn of me sleeping in. Mom rests now, she wrote. Dad does stuff. Forrest's page had a photo of me at my speaking engagement, standing on stage in front of hundreds of people. My mom helps everyone see each other, he wrote, even people who forgot how. Terrence's page was simple, a photo from our 10th anniversary dinner. Below it, he'd written, "Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for demanding more. I'm still learning, and I'll keep learning for the rest of my life." I didn't know how to respond, so I just held the book and let the tears fall. Mom's crying again, Forrest said. Is that good crying or bad crying? Good crying, I managed. Definitely good crying. That night, after the kids were asleep and the house was quiet, Terrence and I sat on the back porch looking at stars we could barely see through the suburban light pollution. You know what I think about sometimes? He said. What? That Easter dinner. What would have happened if I'd just told the truth? You mean admitted you weren't doing half? Yeah, right there in front of everyone. What if I'd looked at you and said, actually, my wife does most of it. I help when I can, but she handles the majority. I considered it. Your mom would have been confused. Your sisters would have asked why. Your brother would have made a joke about being whipped. Probably. But I would have felt seen. For the first time in 7 years, I would have felt visible. He turned to look at me. I'm sorry I didn't give you that. I know. I'll spend the rest of my life giving it to you now. I know that too. We sat in silence for a while. The comfortable kind. The kind that only comes after you've said everything that needed to be said and found a way through to the other side. I love you, he said eventually. I love you too. Even though I forgot Willa's lunch twice in the first week, especially because of that. It proved my point. He laughed. A real laugh. The kind I hadn't heard from him in years during that dark period before the challenge. To invisible labor, he said, raising his empty coffee cup, to finally seeing it. We clinked our cups together in the darkness. Some stories end with revenge. Some end with vindication. Some end with dramatic confrontations and public humiliations. Mine ended with something simpler. A husband who finally understood. A family that finally saw me. A partnership that was finally equal. It took 6 weeks to prove a point that should have been obvious from the start. But in the end, those 6 weeks changed everything.